Good morning, everyone. My name's Jennifer Hutchins, and this is MANP Connects 2025. Welcome to the first episode of MANP Connects in 2025. We are so excited about today's programming. We have an amazing lineup of guests who are going to be telling us about their work. It's very inspiring, cool work for their particular area of interest, but it's all centered around using storytelling as a way to bridge communities, all different ways of using storytelling, each of these three people. So I'm going to get to them in just a minute. First thing I just want to say is I still love Harvard Pilgrim. I still drink out of their coffee mug. This is my cute way of thanking our friends at Harvard Pilgrim. So good morning. Everybody, MANP Connects was started, get this, almost 5 years ago. Can you believe it? Nope, me neither. Almost 5 years ago, April 2020, we started it as a way to meet informally online with our community because why? We were all trying to figure out what the heck the lockdown of the COVID pandemic was going to mean for our nonprofits. And the only thing we could think of to do at MANP was to start connecting and open up the gates to say, hey, come on and literally it was Jen's living room back then, right? Come on into Jen's living room, grab a cup of coffee, and let's have a conversation and start sharing information and building community. And that's what we did. And at first we did it every Friday morning for every week. And we decided that it should be from 9 to 9:45 because we're all really busy. And one of the hardest things for nonprofit professionals is to carve out time to do these types of things because our direct service work, the immediate pressures of achieving our goals can be overwhelming and really pull us away from the community building and info sharing and peer learning that can provide medium to longer term benefits. And so we said, okay, you know what? These people do not want to mess around. So we're going to start at 9 o'clock and we're going to end at 9:45. And the other thing that we've learned in this process is that it's challenging to do that. Because I'll tell you, and these three people that you're going to meet today are perfect examples of this. I could have hour-long or more conversations with each of these people because they have accomplished so much and they're so articulate and so inspiring. But we're not going to do that. So I have to discipline us to meet these people, dig in a little bit to the special sauce that gets them up in the morning and what they can share with you, and then encourage you to learn more about their work, learn more about them, and build community that way. So we will be wrapping up right at 9:45. As I said, we had 300 registrants to today's program, which is amazing. We just love building community across the nonprofit sector in this beautiful state of Maine. So welcome. I'm so glad you're all here. Why storytelling? Well, to be honest, one of the reasons was because I met one of the guests in the last month and I just said, people need to know that she's in this state. She's done incredible work, and I'm so excited to introduce you to her. And then we quickly found other people who, very similar to her, are doing incredible work around storytelling. But I do want to say what really relevant to me, which is why I'm so inspired that so many of you have chosen to register and learn more about these people, their work, and storytelling, is two reasons. One is we are often told as nonprofit leaders and professionals, you need to get your story out. You need to talk about the amazing work you do. And we go, sorry, from the board members, I'm a board member, I'm allowed to do that. Right. And we're often told that, but it's not as easy as one thinks, right? It's not as simple because for all kinds of reasons, but we're told nonprofits need to tell their stories more. Okay, well, let's start talking about that. And number two is something actually I'm more passionate about, which is storytelling is the key to relationship building, and relationship building is the key to bridging divides and building community. And I believe, my personal belief is that the nonprofit sector is uniquely poised to know how to do that work really, really well. And my next guest is exactly where I want to start because she is a 7-year veteran of the national storytelling nonprofit StoryCorps. You've probably heard them on public radio potentially. And Jacqueline Van Meter, who's going to be joining me on screen, she has an incredible career of learning through nonprofits how to tell stories. It's just so inspiring to me. She spent a year in the StoryCorps Airstream recording booth, touring around the country, learning about stories. And now she's training. She's training people on how to do this. And in fact, she's going to be leading a training through the SALT Institute at Maine College of Art and Design that you will be putting a link in a couple of times, both in the chat and then also in our follow-up. And anyway, welcome, Jacqueline. I'm so excited. You're my new Maine friend.
What an introduction. Thank you so much, Jennifer. I really appreciate it. Thanks.
Yeah. You doing good this morning?
Pardon?
You're doing well this morning?
I'm doing great this morning. I couldn't be happier to be here with y'all.
Okay, great. Well, let's dive right in. Obviously, StoryCorps has placed you right at the center of telling national stories. How do you think community-driven storytelling has really unique strengths in terms of, well, you tell me. What's the power of community-driven storytelling?
Sure. Well, I think it's important to kind of define community-driven storytelling and maybe contrast it a little bit with kind of a more top-down approach, right? Which it is typical, it's classic, in small organizations are resource constrained. And so oftentimes a top-down approach to storytelling tends to ask, how can telling our stories serve our organization and the future of our work? Fair. But the process tends to be driven by organizational messaging needs and the timing constraints of things like fundraising cycles or campaign deadlines. And there can be a lot of pitfalls with this kind of approach, right? Among other things, power dynamics can leave participants feeling obligated or rushed to tell their story, and they might feel like there's a right way or a wrong way to tell their own story. And so I guess I want to start by saying even the best intentioned organizations can kind of fall into this pattern if they haven't examined their storytelling practices critically. Now, by contrast, when we say community-led storytelling, right, the goal is still collecting stories, sharing and uplifting stories, and it can even be based around, key themes. But it starts with a fundamentally different question, which is, how can the storytelling experience be meaningful for our storytellers, right? Telling your story can be a really powerful and empowering experience for storytellers. And so you facilitating this experience for them can be an articulation of your mission, right? And the process can really strengthen relationships, as you said earlier, which is really essential to the success of your movement and your mission. So kind of in broad terms, that process of collecting those stories is really driven by creating a culture of storytelling that invites participants to honor and celebrate their own stories, right? You want to give them a platform that allows them to share the truths that matter most to them. And at my work at StoryCorps, we kind of took this a step further and didn't only invite people to sort of share the stories that were most meaningful to them, but actually to share it in conversation with a person that really matters to them. So organizationally, we would provide the structure and support resources for them to share their story, like with someone that they really trust and care about. They define what they speak about. They define what they don't speak about. Agency and informed consent is really at the core of it. But what we find again and again is that when you cede the control of the narrative and you're really opening it up and trusting the participants to drive the process and speak from the heart about what matters most to them, what comes out of that storytelling process is infinitely more nuanced, it's more authentic, it's more emotional, and it just leads to better stories.
Great. Wonderful. So can you get a little more specific in terms of a lot of our nonprofits are looking at wanting to have a social impact or change in the community. Are there key elements that you think are important for a story to help achieve that goal?
Absolutely. Well, first, you want the story to be compelling. And so there's sort of the classic components that make a story really great, vivid characters, an arc with a beginning, a middle, and an end, and reflection, stakes and uncertainty, and then a resolution and a bigger takeaway. That keeps your audiences following the story and listening. But what really makes those stories unforgettable and what really impacts the listener and cuts through the noise is when there are real human dynamics and trust and vulnerability in the story. When people are, again, speaking from the heart, when they're speaking with specificity and you can really feel them light up and go there. And in terms of driving change from a sort of strategic perspective, you want to make sure that the tension and the uncertainty in the story is directly connected to systems of inequity, right? To the sort of systemic problems that your organization is working to solve. So it isn't just an individual problem facing one person, but you really want to center the storyteller as the protagonist, but you also want to frame it so that what they're working against and what they're navigating is a system that affects different people. And kind of by extension, you want to make sure the storyteller is your protagonist and your organization isn't the protagonist, but rather your organization is playing a part in creating the relationships that's helping the storyteller to navigate to a place of success, right? So you're placing your organization in this larger ecosystem of a movement.
Well, you know what that makes me think of, and Jacqueline, we had a question about this, and I know from just personal experience of just landing on that adjective you used of compelling. First of all, we can be our own harshest critic when it comes to what is and isn't compelling, right? And then, as you're pointing out, a lot of times at nonprofits, we tend to, and understandably, we think of the organization first. And so we start trying to tell a story from almost the organizational vantage point, which is oftentimes, which is what you're saying, which is not often the most compelling. And we had a question that came in the registration time, and the question was, how do we tell our story when the impact is often the nonprofit impact is usually less visible and less dramatic, right? Like, we aren't necessarily dealing with populations that obviously to pull at the heartstrings. And it just occurred to me, you might have an example or something of, sometimes I think people kind of need to turn the impact inside out to find the really good stuff. And I just wondered if you had an example of that, because I just know a lot of nonprofits may feel like, well, we don't really do compelling.
Right. Oh, that's such a beautiful way of saying that. I love that, of sort of turning the impact inside out. So absolutely. I mean, so often at StoryCorps, people would say, oh, I heard the story on the radio. I don't have a story like that. Everybody has a story to tell. You don't have to have great drama or great expertise to be an expert in your own life. And the smallest moments can be really poignant. And so I think, again, it starts with, what will storytelling as an experience, how can it be meaningful for your storyteller? And I think, just, by way of example, I've worked with loads of different organizations, big and small, and I'm thinking of let's see, like a public charter school out in the Bay Area that wanted to celebrate their 20th anniversary, and they were really innovative in their community practices, and they wanted to tell the story of how that community supported one another and fostered the growth of their students. And with any kind of organization, everybody plays a part, right? Every community has this sort of multi-dimensional collection of people that have a perspective on things. And so just zeroing in on which voices do people not hear from enough when they think about our organization? And then how do we bring that person in? And what could be a meaningful experience for them to share in terms of reflecting on a story with someone that matters to them from their story? And then they can simply talk to one another and say, how have you seen me grow over the last 5 years? Like, what's been the biggest surprise about our work together? Walk me through a moment where we had to link arm in arm and solve a problem. And it doesn't have to be huge. It just has to be honest and authentic, and it's meaningful to the storytellers. That's so illuminating for the listener, and your audiences are gonna feel the impact, not just hear it.
Yeah, great, wonderful, thank you. Okay, this is that moment where I have to discipline myself. I'm so sorry that I have to cut our time short, but I'm sure everybody can tell that you know a whole lot, and you've been really kind. There's some resources that you've suggested for folks that we're going to be sharing about specific tools and resources for nonprofits telling their stories. We'll be sharing those in chat and have those available. Thank you, Jacqueline. I'm so excited you're now calling Maine home, and good luck with your training at the Salt Institute at Mecca. And I look forward to staying in touch with you. Thank you.
Thank you all.
Yeah. Meadow, you are next. Welcome to Meadow Dibble. She is the founder of Atlantic Black Box, and she has agreed to come and talk to us about her extraordinary work. Meadow has a PhD. She's a researcher and anti-racist historical recovery advocate. She's done incredible work. She's taught at our own Maine Colby College. She's been working she founded Atlantic Black Box as a way to take up the critical work of researching and reckoning with the region's active role in colonization and the global economy of enslavement. Welcome, Meadow. Thank you for being here.
It's such a pleasure. I really appreciate the invitation.
Yeah, thank you so much. Well, we're going to dig right in because, as I said in the introduction, we're only going to be doing a touch on the incredible work that you are doing. So dive right in with the first question. What role do you see storytelling playing in your work in terms of telling Maine's history of colonization and slavery?
Well, I do first want to thank you for this particular prompt, and I feel it's very apt for us as an organization. And personally, I'll say that I come from story in the same way that I come from Cape Cod. I don't, my PhD, for all that it matters, was not in the field of history. I studied literature. And I was converted to history very abruptly when one day, finding myself living back in my own hometown, in the very neighborhood where I grew up, in the place that I thought I knew best in the world, I encountered a headstone in what was known as the Sea Captain's Cemetery that turned my world upside down. It was a stone on which it was inscribed that a man named Benjamin Crosby had died in Africa. And until that moment of encounter, I, who had spent at that point 6 years of my life living in West Africa, had no sense that the people from my hometown had been sailing to that place 200 years before I went off and made a life there. And I realized in that moment that that man's intentions and motivations in going there had been very, very different from my own. And I began digging. And what I quickly realized was that my town's connections to that place were deep and long-standing, and that it was not just my town, that it was all the towns surrounding me on Cape Cod, and that it was all the towns up and down the eastern seaboard, the seacoast in New England, and that even beyond the coastal towns, that New England itself, its inland regions, were deeply and heavily invested in what we have referred to as the economy of enslavement, involvement in the slave trade, building the vessels that were used to transport human beings from Africa to the West Indies, to the American South, to South America rather. And that even these inland towns were involved through transporting commodities from this place and provisioning plantations in the West Indies, notably. And all of those stories were there at the local level. The evidence was there, hiding in plain sight. And yet historians had some, notably African-American historians, had been trying to bring our attention to these facts and realities for a long time. But the dominant narrative in this region, long problematically known as New England, was so powerful and persistent that in fact our maritime heritage was one from which we could derive great pride and that we could celebrate uncritically. And other historians, white historians from the the institution, had sort of carefully, it seemed, been avoiding, what really constituted a gaping hole in our historical narrative in connection to slavery and colonization. And what Atlantic Black Box was created to do was to empower citizen historians, if you will, in the same way we talk about citizen scientists who will count butterflies in a butterfly migration and report that information back to scientists in their labs who can't possibly be everywhere all at once out in the fields doing this work, and who can help make sense of that data, or, counting plastics in the ocean. We wanted to draw on that model of engaging people at the local level in asking very basic questions about the places where we live and that we claim to love deeply. And if we care to love these places, we must then know what happened here. Because what happened here, and this is the critical piece, it's still happening here. What was done 200 years ago, 150 years ago, it continues to live in this place and act upon us. And so this organization supports folks throughout the region in finding the tools necessary to do that digging. And then we help to provide a platform through which people can share those stories of what we call historical recovery. And I can dig more into that concept, if you will, but I'll pause there.
Yeah, Meadow, that is so inspiring. Thank you so much for that. Yeah, feeling very inspired by it. Can you talk about what has come out of some of your work? Do you have an example of how beginning to bring these stories forth has led to action and change, or some kind of transformation for a group of people in some way?
Yeah, honestly, we're seeing it all around us. You named 2020 as the year that MANP began gathering folks in this forum. 2020 is the year that Atlantic Black Box, after developing as a coalition, we began doing public facing events. And I think, as we've all witnessed in the last 5 years, there has been a tremendous awakening to the reality of New England's deep involvement in colonization and slavery, with organizations. And I saw our friends from Victoria Mansion here today. Lisa Lutz from the Castine Historical Society is here. We have seen organizations, historical societies, small museums, but also community groups coming together to do this research and to begin to make sense of not just reconstructing the story of what happened here, but then what does this mean for us today? What does this require of us in terms of change and action? That is truly transformative. It's shifting the narrative, right? This deeply entrenched narrative that we have such an emotional attachment to. None of us wants to be bathing in shame and discomfort. And yet what we see is that when we do this work of historical recovery together, in community, and we're supporting one another and not playing the blame game and pointing fingers, but when we all come forward and say, we've all been bathing in toxic waters, and how can we possibly begin the long, hard work of cleaning up this environment that is deeply impacting us and that is quite literally making us sick. And of course, which when we think about the Black and Indigenous communities most impacted by these histories, is literally killing people. We recognize today that racism is a public health crisis. And so change is happening. It's in some ways you could say it's been a dramatic shift in the narrative over these past 5 years. Since George Floyd's murder really reactivated the Black Lives Matter movement and set off in a global reckoning with racism and the ways in which those legacies continue to impact us today. At the same time, we know that it is a slow process. And so at Atlantic Black Box, we've invited partners, friends, and anyone willing to collaborate into a project that we're calling the Walk for Historical and Ecological Recovery. We refer to as WARE for short. And embedded in this initiative is the notion of walking slowly together, building muscle for this work that there is no sort of end point to it. The point is to walk together towards change and healing.
Wow, that's incredible. We have put a link in the chat to that work, Walk for Historical and Ecological Recovery. I'm so excited to learn, to take this opportunity, having met you for this program, to look into that some more. I really appreciate it. Unfortunately, I do want to make time for our next guest. But thank you for your time, Meadow. Thank you for your work. And I look forward to a time when I can listen to you talk more. I'm going to be looking out for your next speaking engagement. So thank you, Meadow.
Jennifer.
Okay. Whew. I told you guys we had some incredible people in line here. My next guest is Erika Sanger, and she is the Executive Director of Opera House Arts. And Erika also comes with an incredible background and storytelling in the way of the institutions she has spent her career working for, cultural and arts organizations through museums and other types of historical societies, and now is living, she's been in New York and North Carolina, and now she's here in Maine, and she's running Opera House Arts. And in particular, she's going to be lifting up the story of Island Women Speak, which is a project of Opera House Arts. But I'm just delighted to meet you, Erika, through this process, and
nice to meet you too.
honor the Navajo rug behind you, because
Yes.
I also have a story about that, but that's for another day. Welcome. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm doing fine. I really am very honored to be invited to participate, being so new to Maine, and to be able to talk about the work of the Opera House Arts at the Stonington Opera House.
Yeah.
And I really believe that everything that the theater does, whether it's through film or live theatrical production or music or anything that we're doing in the space, is about the shared human experience through storytelling. But this Island Women Speak is a really, really special program.
So before I have you tell us more specifically about how that came about, and I recognize that you are you're stewarding and managing and carrying forward that story. There are many people who have teamed with you, so this is not a test to make sure you know all the details of how it started. But I want to center it around a really important question that came to us before, as people were registering, and it's also been in the chat a couple of times. And I, both Jacqueline and Meadow have, they are working with people who, there's this question of who gets to tell the story, right? And this idea of ethical storytelling. And so here in the nonprofit sector, because many of us are, our impact is for people who come from marginalized communities, or who come from vulnerable backgrounds and have had vulnerable experiences. And unfortunately, and I'm not leaving myself out of this, sometimes the nonprofit community can be somewhat tone deaf about about telling other people's stories on behalf of the nonprofit, right? Like, we do good work. Why wouldn't everybody want that story told? And fortunately, over the last few years, there's been an emergence of understanding around ethical storytelling. So if you wouldn't mind starting out that by talking about the Island Women Speaks project, because one of the questions is, how does an organization go about approaching and bringing people to the table and having them feel like they get to be the directors of their own story, if you will?
Yeah, yeah. So the program's in its 7th year, and every year we do a public call, and we invite the women who have participated in the past to invite their friends to participate. It's a very small community. There are 3,000 people on Deer Isle in the wintertime. That's our year-round community size. So it's voluntary, and the women are supported by the work of the program director, Debbie Weil, who is an author herself, a published author, and she has a blog, and she helps the women craft their stories. We have a staff person, Jessica Shively, who is also a published author, who helps the women craft their stories. And then our artistic director, Catherine Markey, works with them to talk about how one presents himself on stage. And it helps people take them to the next level. We have a couple of really shy women, right? Oh, I've never been on stage. No one wants to listen to my story about what happened to me. And so with this coaching and with helping shape the story from what might be an interior voice into something that can be shared in a group setting. It doesn't happen quickly. They're devoting a couple of months of time, both Debbie and the Opera House and the storytellers. So we bring them, they're not professionals. Some of them have never spoken in public before. So how do you take that internal narrative and share it in a way with the group? And one of the ways we do it is we give each year a theme. This year's theme is My Hidden Superpower. So it helps people, it gives them a place to start. This year, particularly from strength, right? You start from what you're strong at and go from there. So
Yeah.
it's not, here's a piece of paper, write down something and stand on stage. It is really a process. And it sells out the space. We're almost sold out. And then those who can't join us in person, it is live streamed. So you can do that as well.
Can you talk a little bit about, so the mission of Opera House Arts, and here, shout out everyone, listen, if you have not been to Stonington and attended something at Opera House Arts, you need to make an effort and go. You will not be disappointed. My husband and I, many years ago, saw an amazing production of The Tempest. And exactly what Erika's talking about, they used local actors who worked in combination with professional actors. And it felt like a story that came right out of the granite that exists on the island. It was just such a beautiful version of The Tempest. Can you talk a little bit about how you see Island Women Speaks meeting your mission, which is to incite art and create community? And I wonder if even you have an example of, similar to as I asked Meadow, an outcome of or an impact that has resulted from Island Women Speaks.
Oh boy. So, the program is an anchor event for the year-round community. It is, people know it's happening. People come to see it, to hear the voices of their neighbors, to hold up the stories of the women, to support the women, given that it is fishing, the largest lobster fishing port in Maine, women are moving forward into those traditional worlds, and this kind of, is elevating those stories a little bit. But just doing the event, this is not the actor equity folks who are coming in to do, or the nationally Grammy winning jazz artists coming in. This is about, connecting to the community and inspiring the community to participate
Yeah.
in doing the work themselves, right? And telling their own stories.
Yeah, just amazing. And what I can also imagine is an impact. And I have certainly noticed this when I have visited the island is that whether it's myth or reality, this constant story that goes on in that region of the island folk versus the summer tourist folk, right? And this division that, similar to From Away, unfortunately, I think it's a story that we too often verbalize. It seems to me like what Island Women Speaks does, and what Opera House Arts has done is blended these two communities
Yes.
in a way that brings them into a physical space, sitting side by side and experiencing the same art project, the same cultural experience, and processing that together, even though they may not be talking about it. And I obviously I'm gushing about Opera House Arts right now, but I really I have experienced it myself, and so I just think I believe so much in it, and so I'm just so excited to see how storytelling at the Opera House has brought, as I said, whether it's a myth that we tend to perpetuate unnecessarily, or there are obviously legitimate, real divisions in the community. Boy,
Sure.
these
Right.
stories can go a long way
Sure.
to helping heal
Sure.
that.
Yeah. There are absolutely divisions, but there are, you talk about people from away. I think that anyone, um, whether you were born on the island, whether you were 12 generations on the island, whether you have come, once a year for 12 years, or you have made that your chosen home, making the commitment to being in that place in that time, is appreciated. I think that there are,
Respecting people's
well,
stories,
thank you
right?
very much. Right. Yeah.
Right?
I think that's
Respecting. Yeah.
where storytelling comes in, that, if you are a good listener, right,
Yeah.
and you can appreciate what people are talking about and what's important to them,
Yeah.
then it helps bridge the gap. But I think that the program, The Island Women Speak, is the most powerful way
Yeah.
that we do that right now.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Well, thank you, Erika.
Thank you, Jennifer.
I'm gonna invite Meadow, if you don't mind, Meadow, to come back on, because I think this question of ethical storytelling is so important that I wondered, and clearly in your own work, you're treading into territory of seeing the value of telling stories. How did you personally grapple with who gets to tell those stories, and how do you begin to uncover them in a way that isn't, once again, the dominant culture deciding which stories are told?
I'm still grappling. I grapple every day, is the reality. And it is, it's very challenging. I was talking yesterday with the advisors to the WARE project, Adila Mohammed among them, who's here today. And we were talking about the challenge in the fact that there is no ethics of public history that exists sort of in this field. There's no sort of professional agreement in the way that, a sort of a do no harm doctrine.
Oh, yeah, interesting. Yeah.
And I think that what is key is that not one of us has the answer. These are answers that we necessarily have to seek together across lines of race, in particular, and ethnicity, and that it's through collaboration. So it's through trust building, which is a challenging proposition given this long history with its continuing legacies. But it's by, walking together and learning to work together that we can begin to understand, who who can speak to what. And so Atlantic Black Box is very committed to recentering the stories of the populations most impacted by this history and marginalized voices. And I'll give the example of Antonio Rocha, a storyteller who has lived in Maine for over 30 years and who has been doing incredible work over the past 3 years, bringing to the public his story, which he calls the ship Malaga. And this is a beautiful example of collaboration where Antonio, having met Kate McMahon, my sort of co-founder of Atlantic Black Box, she's a researcher who's been studying Maine's role in the illicit slave trade. Antonio took the research that Kate had done as a historian about a ship that was built in Brunswick and that was involved in the illegal slave trade, and he transformed that into the most incredibly powerful story that's deeply connected to his own personal story, because that vessel then sailed to Brazil and brought captives back to the US, and very much sort of mimicking his own journey, Antonio's own journey, and being from Brazil himself. So Antonio's been sharing this story. He'll be sharing it this Monday in the context of MLK Day. Unfortunately, that performance is sold out, but I do want to encourage you all to catch Antonio's story where you can. We're collaborating with Antonio and two filmmakers, David Camlin and Joanna Weaver, to make a documentary about Antonio's story and the ship Malaga.
Great, wonderful. Thank you so much. Jacqueline, I'm going to give you an opportunity, if you're willing, to also answer this question. If you have any just sort of high-level tips. I know it's complicated, as Meadow said. There's not a certification for ethical storytelling, but I'm sure it's come up for you. And in particular, one of our members in the chat asked specifically, they work for a domestic violence organization. Do you, just to close this out here, do you have a tip or two or a suggestion for resource for our folks?
Absolutely. I mean, there's a lot to say here, but I think first and foremost, I would start by saying two things. One, you should not approach storytelling from a place of urgency around getting the story so you can share it out immediately.
Great point.
The most ethical way to approach storytelling is to recognize what storytelling can do to serve your community and articulate your mission, and embed those kinds of practices into the culture of your organization, into your programs, so that people feel safe and welcomed, and you're building trust towards storytelling, and it isn't extractive. So that's
Right.
piece one. And piece number two is, as you're defining what your storytelling program is going to look like, that needs to be shaped by the people who are closest to your storytellers, people who love them, people who are them and trust them, right? Who have those really close relationships, right? It cannot come from the top down. It needs to be, collectively established by people who really love and are putting those storytellers' interests first and foremost. So you asked about, survivors of domestic violence. You're not pressuring those people to share their stories. You're thinking throughout the process, how do we preserve anonymity? What are creative ways that we can uplift the story without revealing the identity? What kind of support are we providing to the storytellers before, during, and after? It can't be a one and done, right? You have to have pre-interviews, we call them, or like touch points before, setting expectations about what the process will be, meeting those expectations, and consent, always, right? If you can, I mean, it can happen sometimes that you put a lot of work into working with a storyteller, crafting their story, recording their story, and then afterwards there's apprehension about what will happen if it's shared. You have to honor your participants. That is the work that you're doing as a nonprofit, is serving this community. Serve them by making the storytelling experience first and foremost about empowering, protecting, supporting them.
Oh, that's really helpful, Jacqueline. And we have a lot of materials, and we've had a training on ethical storytelling in the past. So you can count on MAMP to keep lifting those things up. Hey, in chat, could you guys, we're going to close out now, but would you guys in chat all give a silent round of applause for how much we appreciate these three incredible people and the work that they're doing? I mean, think about it, folks. I mean, nonprofits and in this case, three women who have dedicated their lives to uncovering. Yep, look at that. I love it. I love MANP Connects. Okay. Anyway, thank you all, Meadow, Erika, and Jacqueline. You're all wonderful, incredible people. So glad to know you. Thank you, everyone, for attending this morning. It is 9:45, and I just really want you to know that we did hear your questions. We'll be sending out some materials in follow-up so that everybody will have an answer to the question that they posed. And we can't wait to see you until we're going to be having a MAMP Connects in February. And we hope you all register and come back. So thanks, everybody. Happy Friday. Have a great long weekend, and honoring Martin Luther King on Monday. Thanks. Bye.